All right, we're going to continue. We're in Jamestown, focusing on the headright system, indentured servitude, and how tobacco really rose as that cash crop. Now, obviously, as we saw on the map earlier, there are Native American villages and settlements nearby the English colonists. And so, one chief that you may be familiar with is Chief Powhatan. He is the father of Pocahontas, and he's going to definitely play a role in this conflict that's kind of persisting between Native Americans and the Englishmen. So, what is true about Pocahontas is that Captain Smith was held prisoner, and there had to be these negotiations for release and all of that stuff. All right. Pocahontas plays a central role in this story because Pocahontas was actually kidnapped by the English, and she was sent off to England eventually, but she was forced to marry John Rolfe. And John Rolfe was the man who kind of brought about tobacco, or really pushed tobacco as a cash crop in Jamestown or in Virginia. All right, so Pocahontas was kidnapped and forced to marry John Rolfe, who was significantly older than her, and we believe the oldest Pocahontas might have been was about 14 years old. The youngest reports say that she was maybe 11 or 12 years old, but she was at most 14 years old when she was kidnapped by the English and forced into this marriage. And she did eventually produce a child from this marriage, but she goes off to England and kind of becomes this symbol of uh, assimilated Native American culture, Native American who assimilates to English culture, I should say. All right, and this marriage kind of brings about peace between the Powhatan and the English settlers in Jamestown because Pocahontas is a princess, and so they don't want to cause any issues now that this marriage has already taken place. And there is also this hope that because of this marriage, not only does the violence subside, but also there's that hope that maybe the Powhatans will have a little leverage in negotiating with English in terms of expanding their land and things like that, because the Powhatans want to make sure that they protect as much of their land as possible. Now, Pocahontas unfortunately will end up dying very young. I can't remember her age off the top of my head, but I believe she only lived to be about 20 or 21 years old, but she did produce a child in that time. So we do have some people today, some Americans today, who are descendants of Pocahontas. Now, the year 1619, why is this a pivotal year for the Chesapeake settlement? Now, there are two reasons. I think I only have one of them on the presentation, but there are definitely two reasons. The big one politically is the House of Burgesses. This is something that kind of sets the stage for what will become the United States many years later. But it is the first system of elected representatives in America. All right. Now keep in mind that not everyone could vote. In order to vote, you had to be white and land owning. You'd be a white and landowning man. All right. So the system of privilege certainly exists, right? The dominance of the wealthy exists, and it's kind of represented in this political system, the House of Burgesses. All of the decisions that the House makes have to be approved by the Virginia Company. Remember, the Virginia Company was that joint stock company that created Virginia in the first place, named after the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth. All right, so even though people can vote, and if you're white and landowning, you have these representatives that are kind of representing your interests. All of the decisions ultimately have to be approved by the Virginia Company. All right, so it is a colony that is very much dominated by the wealthy. And my favorite topic, Nathaniel Bacon's rebellion in 1676. On the left there, you see Nathaniel Bacon. On the right there, you see Governor William Berkeley. Now, there are a lot of issues at play here whenever we talk about Bacon's rebellion. Um, it is a huge turning point in America, especially in terms of race relations and how blacks and whites interact with each other. Now, a little background. All right. What we see, as we saw in that map earlier that I pointed out, you have many English people who are settling further into the land, a little bit further from the water. Now, those tend to be people that were poor, and they had at one point been indentured servants, maybe, and they're getting that land. Remember, when their contract is over, they're promised land and money. And so the freed indentured servants, those who survive, are getting that land that's more inland. And so the problem is, because their land is more inland, they are the first line of defense almost for the wealthy in terms of the attacks from the Native Americans. So they are the first ones to get attacked by the Native Americans because they're on the outside. And so they want the government, which is represented by Governor William Berkeley, to protect them from these Native American attacks. And they see it as, because of their status, as you know, they have a lower social status than those who are part of the aristocracy who were born into wealth. They see it as they are kind of these buffers for the wealthy, that the wealthy are keeping them on the outskirts and they're not protecting them because they're more concerned with protecting themselves. All right. And so the first part of Bacon's rebellion is Nathaniel Bacon organizes an attack on the Native American settlers, on the Native American villages, I should say. And then he orchestrates an attack on Governor Berkeley. All right, and the cities and the large settlements in the Virginia area. All right, so they burn Jamestown to the ground. Important, Nathaniel Bacon will fail at this rebellion. All right, but what we get is the idea of black codes that start to slowly develop. And so when I say this is a turning point in terms of race relations, and we'll talk about this more in class, we'll listen to a speech and such. When I say it's because indentured servants at the time, some were white, some were black. Lots of them were white, but this idea that they are uniting, blacks and whites are fighting together to rebel against the wealthy. That's ultimately what they're doing, right? And so what they're recognizing is that they have a common condition. And in this common condition, they see themselves as the same, and they want to take out this hierarchy, to take out Governor Berkeley and the people who are profiting off of them being oppressed and their lives being endangered. All right, so you have the indentured servants and the former indentured servants, the poor farmers, who are combining forces in order to do this. They don't care about race at this time. But what this does, though, is it puts fear into the minds and the hearts of the wealthy white men. They are terrified that there's this united force, because really the wealthy whites are in the minority. There's far more poor people, right, and indentured servants than there are wealthy white men. And so what do they do in response to this? In response to Bacon's rebellion, and this is why this is such an important turning point, they phase out indentured servants. They say, okay, we're going to slowly phase out this indentured servitude. White people will no longer be indentured servants eventually. And what they do is they increase the passage of Africans coming to the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, what they start are the black codes. They start the institution of slavery, and what Bacon's rebellion leads to, because Nathaniel Bacon failed, right? And because it put so much fear in the white wealthy class, what it leads to is the establishment of white privilege. They make the poor whites think that they are higher than the blacks, right? And they say, well, look, we'll give you land. You don't have to work in the field. You don't have to be an indentured servant anymore. We'll give you all these benefits, right? Or they make it seem like they're benefits. And ultimately, we create this division between black and white. Poor whites and blacks don't see themselves in a common condition anymore. Now the poor whites see themselves as better than the blacks because at least they're not slaves. All right? They want to be a part of the good old boys club. And so the wealthy white people make them think that they are. And I want you guys to think about how that looks today, right? Whenever, especially in terms of politics, one thing that people always say is, well, why is it that so many poor whites tend to vote against their own interest? It goes back to Bacon's Rebellion. It's this idea they want to be a part of this good old boys club. Now that kind of wraps up Jamestown, but we're looking at a different part of the Chesapeake region now, and that is the Maryland area. What you see here is a man by the name of George Calvert, also known as Lord Baltimore. So always associate Lord Baltimore with Baltimore, Maryland. He will be the founder of the colony Maryland, which is also part of Chesapeake. Keep that, the Chesapeake region, I should say. Keep that in mind, and also keep in mind that the Chesapeake region is technically a southern colony. We're just handling it separately because of the amount of information. Now, the reason it was founded, there were some commercial purposes. They did want to make some money, but another reason is that they wanted religious freedom. And so Maryland is founded as a Catholic colony, essentially. All right. And so what they really promote, though, is religious tolerance for all Christians. And so unfortunately, you can't really see at the bottom there that act of toleration in 1649. That's incredibly important for you to know, because it's religious tolerance for Christians. What they say is that as long as you worship Christ, you have religious freedom. Now, if you don't worship Christ, then you don't have religious freedom. And that's important because there were other colonies who they weren't very welcoming to Catholics at all. All right. And so that's why that act of toleration is kind of a turning point for religious freedom in America. All right. Now, Lord Baltimore didn't necessarily get to occupy Maryland, but he is still considered the founder. He died before the settlement was ever actually established, but he is considered the founder technically. All right, and so that pretty much wraps up Chesapeake. I'm going to do a different video for New England.